That was Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg. In their own words, they are two of the teenage survivors of the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School last month. Emma and David and a group of their fellow classmates have been the faces of the March for Our Lives movement. You've seen them on cable news, on national talk shows, in interview after interview, very eloquently and passionately stating their case for stricter gun laws. Sometimes easy to forget that they are teenagers still grieving from a mass shooting that killed 17 of their friends and teachers. Let's talk about the psychological impact in this evening's Spotlight. Joining us now in studio, Ziv Cohen, Clinical Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. Ziv, what happens to people who are so busy in the wake of what they describe as a possible PTSD environment that they don't necessarily grieve or have the time to grieve the way most people do?
Yeah, it's grief deferred, and so the busyness can allow them to externally function better and appear to be functioning better. But at some point, there's going to be a reckoning, and those symptoms are going to have to be dealt with. And I would say the earlier, the better, because what we know about trauma is that if you defer treatment, the symptoms become harder to treat.
So it's eventually going to catch up with them.
Absolutely.
And would there also perhaps be an even greater impact because they have been in the public spotlight, and whether it's giving national interviews or staging a march, there's an emotional high to that. But at a certain point, that attention might start to diminish.
Absolutely. So a psychologist, Erik Erikson, in 1968 wrote a book, Identity, Youth in Crisis. And he talks about how this age, adolescence, is really where you're trying to develop your identity. And I think that, what you can see in kids who go through trauma at this age is that it can spur them on to develop a certain kind of identity for themselves. In this case, it's an identity of, we're going to save the world. And you can see that in many ways, that's one way of coping with the trauma and can produce a sense of confidence and an ability to deal with the stress. But at the same time, it's probably not the totally realistic method for the long run.
And when they aren't able to save the world or even necessarily, say, rage the age limit, as they were hoping to do in Florida, it must be like hitting a wall.
Absolutely. So, this idealization, I think they have an idealization of themselves. They're really seeing themselves as better versions of their parents, better versions of the adults around them who have failed them. And I think that we as adults look at them and really want to see them in the same way. We want to imagine that they are going to rescue us from this terrible situation that we're in, where we're constantly having these school shootings. But I think that over time, we're going to see that, unfortunately, there'll be more episodes of violence, and that will be very discouraging. And I think that where the role of mental health care comes in is to then help them process that discouragement and integrate it into their personality in a more stable way so that they can still be altruistic, try to help society, but it's okay to not save the world.
It sounds like it also needs to be something systemic, and we've picked up from Parkland, Florida, a lot of the families, yes, they are getting help, but it's on a more family-by-family, individual basis. It doesn't seem like there's been a really integrated approach from the schools, whether it's that school or any others.
And that really points to the deficits in our national mental health care system, particularly for youth. Most youth get their mental health care at school, but the amount of mental health care and the quality of mental health care that's available at school is pretty meager. And so the degree of trauma and the needs of this community are so large that one would imagine it's dwarfed by what can be provided at the school.
Also fair to say that this movement, though, that they formed provides something of a safety net for them, because when one of them perhaps has some successes in dealing with mental health, they already have a network now that they can share it with.
I agree. And, psychologists have also talked about this, that your peer group has a big influence on your identity. And so associating in a positive way with other peers where they're developing an alternative narrative, one where they're not victims, but one where they're actually heroes, I think that is a model for resilience and something that can stand them in good stead.
Ziv Cohen, Clinical Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. Ziv, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Those Parkland students